What's that phrase, you are what you eat? Well, maybe it should say you are what you think you're eating. My guest today is a guy named Dr. Jonny Bowden. Jonny is known as the Nutrition Myth Buster. He's a nationally known expert on weight loss. He's written 15 books and like a zillion articles for magazines from Oprah to GQ. On this Dying to Ask, why, if your 2020 resolution was to cut out fill in the blank food, you have probably already failed. What you probably do not know about the popular diets out there, everything from plant-based to keto, foods you should be eating every day, what you'll never eat again once you know what's actually in it, and does the Nutrition Myth Buster have a guilty pleasure? He does. We'll tell you what it is. Dr. Jonny Bowden is my guest on Dying to Ask. Have you ever wondered, how did they do that? I'm talking about the art of the follow-through. I'm Deirdre Fitzpatrick, and Dying to Ask is the podcast that gets me off a TV news set and into candid conversations with authors, entrepreneurs, and influencers I have been dying to talk to. So brace yourself. This is a verbal gut check about what it takes to go from idea to reality. And who knows, maybe along the way, you'll get some answers to questions you've been dying to ask. Dr. Jonny, thanks for coming on the Dying to Ask podcast. I'm really excited to get to talk to you today.
I am too, and I'm glad you have me. Thank you very much.
You bet. So here's what I love about your story. You are not somebody who went from cradle till now eating the right way your entire life. In fact, you had a very colorful start, and that's what really got you down this road to being, a better eater.
It's kind of exactly true. I mean, I literally began my health journey at 38. So that should give you some idea. So I was recently,
not only does it give us an idea, I think it gives us hope.
Well, yeah, good. I hope it does. You asked earlier how I became the Nutrition Myth Buster. I was lucky enough at the time. Trainers only knew what they learned in training education. It was very, very narrow. And the people who controlled our nutrition education was the American Dietetic Association, which I have said many times in print is the single most destructive organization in terms of our health in America that ever existed. They've changed their name now. Now they're the American Academy of Nutrition and Dietetics. They've gotten a little bit better. But at the time, they were the handmaidens of mainstream medicine. So they didn't believe in supplements. They thought you could get everything you needed from food. They had talking points and spokespeople, and it was always the most conservative medical opinion of the times. And I bought it. Low-fat diets. Everything's about calories. You can exercise off any kind of weight if you just do enough spin classes. I mean, we bought this low-fat nonsense 1,000% because that's what we learned. I was lucky enough to be so interested in the nutrition aspect of this that I started taking some courses and thinking maybe I could get a degree in that. Who knows? And I was lucky enough to have as a mentor and teacher a lot of skeptics, a lot of people who did not buy this low-fat stuff. And, we're all in the era now of keto and stuff. This was just heresy in the 90s to even.
Do you know what? It's funny. I was in college back then. What I remember is the company Snackwells came out, which was low-fat cookies. Do you remember that? And I remember, we'd sit around the dorms and we'd have, the low-fat, no-fat cookies, but you'd eat like a box of them. So it's interesting, like the 80s, when you're talking about this time, it was the time when gyms like an Equinox started coming onto the scene where the cardio craze with step aerobics and that kind of thing, and Reebok really started exploding. But then also this obsession with these different types of diets also started gaining a lot more steam. So it's interesting, your timing on getting interested about food was really dead on to where the country was going at that time.
It was very fortuitous. Thanks for pointing that out because, as I said, this was around 1991. So right around that time, Atkins republishes or does a new edition of his classic 1972 book, The New Diet Revolution. So there have been 3 editions of that. 1992 and it was getting a lot of press. And of course, we trainers, and everyone in the establishment thought this guy should just have his medical license revoked. And, he was telling people to eat pork rinds and bacon and high-fat diets. I just thought was a charlatan. And what would happen, and this is exactly how it happened. He's getting all this publicity. We're teaching low-fat, calorie burning, blah, 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 blah. And by the way, not all our clients did very well with that low-fat regime and with that philosophy. And looking back on it, we see, or many of us see, how completely ill-advised all of that was. But we kind of ignored that and just figured if they weren't doing well on our advice, it had to be because they were cheating. It could never be because our advice was boneheadedly stupid. It had to. They were cheating on it. They were either sneaking food or they weren't exercising, none of which was true. They were doing what we were telling them. What we were telling them was BS. So into this kind of a mix, here's the experience that I had, my epiphany. I had clients who were not doing well on this low-fat nonsense. And they'd come in and say, you know what, I'm going to try the Atkins diet. And we would say, you cannot do that. That is crazy. Sure, you might lose a little weight. So do the models who have cocaine every day. That's not the point. You're going to die of a heart attack with all that eggs and cholesterol and all that stuff. You can't do that. They didn't listen to us, and they did it anyway. And I remember a couple of them in particular. They came back, and they had blood tests that were better. Their triglycerides had dropped. The cholesterol that they were all worried about was doing very well. They looked better. Their blood pressure had dropped. Now, that's a real risk factor. Their waist had shrunk a little. Their eyes looked clearer. They just had more energy. They were not dying on the Atkins diet, which, for a psychologist, is something called cognitive dissonance. Two ideas that can't exist in the same place. Either the Atkins diet kills you, or people get healthier on it. Those two things can't be true. And what we were seeing was people were getting remarkably healthy on the Atkins diet.
And then you thought, what?
Well, something's wrong. Something's got to be wrong here. Something that we're being taught or something that we're seeing is not fitting. And that's how I think I kind of got on the track of like, how much of this stuff we've taught is just myth? And I went back to school. First thing I did was get a degree that doesn't exist anymore. The Certified Nutritionist designation was a one-year course. It was better than nothing, but it wasn't very great. And as time went on, I did a PhD in integrative nutrition. And then I knew what I was talking about. And then I could question the things I had already started questioning, but with some letters after my name. So when I said this is BS, it now meant a little bit more because I kind of knew what I was talking about.
You know, the other thing that you did, though, is you went back and you got a master's in psychology. And that's the part of it that I also find so interesting because I feel like so much of food and diet, our appearance, how we feel, is the way our brain feels too. So I think that's what I find so interesting about your background is, yeah, you can call yourself a zealot, but you've got the alphabet soup after your name to really talk about what you're saying with a lot of credibility.
Thank you. I was interested during this whole music period. I was also torn because I really loved the idea of becoming a clinical psychologist. So I did actually get the master's during my music career. And I thought, well, I guess I'll never use it until I got into health and fitness and realized exactly what you said and the 100% truth of what you said, which is that the mind and the body are 1,000% related and intertwined. And what one does, the other pays for, and what one does on this side is noticed on that side. And there is no nature versus nurture. They operate together. Everybody knows that in the field now. They integrate. The mind talks to the gut talks to the mind, the hormones talk to the neurotransmitters, they all work together. So how you feel about yourself, how you feel about your behavior, how you feel about your food, your relationship, all of these things matter enormously in your health and health.
Dr. Jonny, riddle me this. We have more information out there than ever before because when you were going back to school while still doing the rock and roll thing, you had to really go back to school. Now I can get onto Google and I can look up all that information that you studied. I might not get the degree, but I can at least look it up and expose it to myself. We have more research on food and eating and exercise than we've ever had before. Yet it feels like America is struggling like it never has before to control our weight, to control our impulses, and to understand why certain foods make us feel and act a certain kind of way. Why is it so hard to eat well right now?
Well, you actually had asked two very great questions. And
I think I asked you 17 questions. Sorry about that.
The first thing you said about, you can go on Google now and do your own research project and get a lot of information is absolutely true. And there are some real autodidacts out there who have educated themselves in biochemistry and medicine in a way that, like, they're invited to speak at medical conferences. This does happen. The other side of that, and the danger of that, is there's a lot of crappy information out there, and people who don't have that background can't necessarily distinguish stuff that looks like it's really smart from stuff that really is not at all. And I think what the degree gave me is not any more access to information than you have, but if you ask me a question and I go research it on the internet, within 3 minutes, I will have reputable sources. I will be able to cut through the first 4 pages of Google things and go, this we should be paying attention to. So it really is difficult for the average consumer because you find it on the internet and it looks really scientific. And some of these guys write in, terms that really sound very smart, but they're just not. They don't have references, or the references are really, when you look at them, are very weak. And so it's very confusing to people because we're being marketed lots of different dietary philosophies, not necessarily because they're better for us, but because someone has to market them. And
we look for the one that says what we want it to say too, and we go, that's it. That's the one I want to follow. I want to go over just like some basic food stuff that you ascribe to these days. You had mentioned the keto diet earlier. This year I'm hearing 3 things. I'm hearing keto still. I'm hearing a lot of people talking about intermittent fasting, and I'm hearing a lot of people talk about plant-based. What are your thoughts on those 3?
The first thought I have on that is all 3 of those are not contradictory. Many people in the keto community, if not most, do some form of intermittent fasting. They work perfectly well together. And as far as plant-based, that's become a kind of catchphrase that means a lot of things. You can be on a keto diet and eat a ton of plants, a ton of them. I think people use that as a kind of code word for veganism, which is a whole different thing. But even on Atkins, you could the amount of carbs you could eat, even certainly by stage 2, was a lot more than most people eat today. It's just that they were not pastas or potatoes or rice or any of those vegetables. They were things like Brussels sprouts and kale and broccoli. And the amount that you can eat of those foods is pretty substantial. So you can have a lot of plants in your diet without being exclusively plant-based. And that's the tricky thing about what that label means to different people.
What is intermittent fasting?
It's very simple. It's you don't eat for a while.
Like how long?
Well, that is debated. Let's take an easy one, 16 hours. So you eat all your food within an 8-hour window, maybe between 10 in the morning and 6 at night. And then you don't eat after 6, and you've done a 16-hour fast.
And so what are the benefits of fasting? What do we know fasting is good for?
Oh, it's an endless list of benefits. Most of it has to do with giving, well, a couple things. One of which is your insulin response. Now, this is something I'm not sure if your listeners don't know what that is. In my view, in my research, in the last 2 books that I've done, has all been about this. The response of your body to blood sugar raising is mediated by a hormone called insulin. Everybody who has a diabetic in the family knows this. Their insulin response is off in some way. So what happens, the real quick thing, is that you eat food, your blood sugar goes up, the pancreas says, oh, got to get that blood sugar into the muscles. We don't want it in the bloodstream. We don't want high blood sugar. So the pancreas secretes a hormone called insulin. And when everything works well, insulin comes along like a Sherpa, gathers up that sugar and the excess sugar in the bloodstream, sends it into the muscle cells. The muscle cells are really happy because they're going to use it to exercise, and everything is just fine. That does not happen in the vast majority of people in this country and any first world country. It just, and the figures for how much it doesn't happen range from anywhere from 25% of the population to 75% of the population. It is just not a system that works. So here's what does happen. What does happen is you eat the American diet, your sugar is constantly elevated, and it goes up far more in response to carbs than it does to anything else. Goes up, here's the list. It goes up the most in response to carbs, processed carbs being at the top, but all carbs, even fruits, things like that, raise blood sugar, followed by protein, which raises it a little bit, but not that seriously, followed by fat, which raises it, guess how much? 0. Fat has no effect on blood sugar or insulin. So here's what happens. When we eat the American diet, our blood sugar is constantly going up. The pancreas is going, holy moly, this guy's eating ding-dongs all day. And it's just throwing that insulin out there. And after a while, the system breaks down. And insulin can't get, the muscle cells are going, we don't want this. What do we want this sugar for anymore? This guy's going to sit around all day at the office, and then he's going to come home and push the remote control. We don't need any energy. Keep it. And so you've got high blood sugar and high insulin. You get a condition called insulin resistance. It leads to diabetes. Diabetes leads to heart disease. So controlling insulin is really the holy grail of health. So back to intermittent fasting. When you don't eat for 16 hours, guess what happens? Insulin normalizes, doesn't it? There's no need for it to go into the system. Some people who have really damaged systems are going to continue to have high insulin, but this helps. This helps to get it back into a normal range where, wow, we're not in emergency mode anymore. So insulin resistance, in my opinion, and in the opinion of the cardiologist, Dr. Sinatra, who I wrote The Great Cholesterol Myth with, insulin resistance is probably the best target for any kind of health program, because it leads to diabetes, which almost 80% of the time leads to heart disease. It causes multiple problems in the body and metabolism. And if you can control that, which you can with food in most cases, then you've made a major step. And intermittent fasting is one of the ways you do that. We have a lot of gut problems in this country. We've talked about a lot of gut problems, the microbiome, all of that. I want to give your digestive system a rest once in a while. You don't need to be feeding it every hour like we used to teach them in the 90s. Eat every 2 hours. Nonsense. You don't need to do that. What you need to do is get better at burning fat so you don't need a constant influx of sugar. And that's the real benefit of intermittent fasting and of a high-fat diet.
So here, if I'm listening to this right now, I'm thinking, all right, I'm on board. I understand the research behind it, but what the heck am I supposed to eat all day long? So why don't we start going through, like, what's a typical day for you? What do you recommend? Like, at what time do you recommend eating? And what kinds of foods are you eating and not eating?
I have moved in my now 30-year career. I have moved away from making recommendations of what people should do, or certainly don't think that they should do what I do. What I do is based on 30 years of close studying how my metabolism reacts. Mm-hmm. I take measurements and blood tests and weight every day, and I monitor my energy. And so I know what I can do, and what I can do may not be what someone else can do. And here's a great example. I have 0 alcohol in my diet. 0. Does that mean I think everybody else should? Absolutely not. People who have peanut allergies can't eat peanuts. Does that mean no one else should? No, peanuts are great food. They have resveratrol. They've got all kinds of good stuff, unless you're allergic to them. So I'm not a believer in follow me. I wrote an article once called I Am Not Your Guru. Tony Robbins did a movie called I Am Not Your Guru. Don't follow gurus. That's my guru message. Don't follow us. Listen, let us be your guide to asking the right questions. So that said, I eat a lot of fat. I don't stick to a keto diet. I find it difficult to stick to. Many of my friends don't. I think it has amazing benefits. I flirt with keto. That's what I always tell people. You can get a lot of benefit out of flirting with keto. You don't have to get married. So
let keto be your mistress.
Keto be your mistress. Exactly. So
that would be an excellent headline for one of your next article.
Excellent headline, and I may just steal it.
You may have it. You may have it, Dr. Johnny. Well, then let me try to backdoor this.
Well, wait. Let me tell you what that looks like. The flirting. Okay. Flirting. I drink a quarter cup of olive oil a day.
Straight.
Well, I've found a way to mix it with homemade vegetable and fruit juice so that it's not a bad deal. But if I have to, straight. Okay. So that's. I have a lot of Malaysian palm oil. This is a fat that, another one of the myths. It's a fat that people use for cooking and that is largely saturated. Mm-hmm. as is coconut oil, another oil that I use a lot. These are great fats. So I try to make it fat heavy. I do eat a fair amount of meat. Mm-hmm. But I also have the occasional slice of pizza. And I also certainly go off the diet, on Sunday nights when our family has a big, gourmet dinner that one of us is, prepares every week. But I've found, my daily stuff is I don't usually eat in the morning. I play tennis every morning, and I'm usually on the court from 7:30 to 9. And I go out there with just coffee, or maybe bulletproof coffee, which is coffee plus a little bit of fat. It could be butter. It could be Malaysian palm oil. It could be MCT oil. It doesn't matter. That's a great source of energy. And I usually don't eat the first meal till after 11 or 12, and I stop eating around 10. It's not a perfect intermittent fast. It's 10 hours. Some people do intermittent fasting 20 hours a day, and they only eat in a 4-hour window. That's very difficult, but probably very, very beneficial. So there are ways to flirt with these concepts without necessarily turning your life upside down. Like I just add more fat and take more carbs out. Here's a way to flirt with keto. You don't have to actually. Yeah, that's usually good advice for most people.
What are some foods that you would never eat anymore based on what you know about them, or that because you know that they don't serve our bodies well? Like, what's something you would take out of your pantry?
Well, there are 3 foods that I think are the worst foods in the American diet for everybody. I don't make usually universal proclamations because I believe so much in metabolic individuality, but these 3 across the board are the worst foods in the American diet: soda, French fries, and donuts. So those are 3 foods I don't eat at all. I mean, yes, when my partner Michelle orders French fries once in a while at the restaurant, I may steal 1 or 2, but that's not on my menu ever. Neither are donuts, and neither is soda. So those are 3 that if you cut those out, there'll be an immediate upgrade to your health.
It's interesting. Okay, so I mean, I'm assuming the first one is pretty obvious with soda. The reason is?
Well, sugar, empty calories. If you're using the diet ones and you're taking artificial sweeteners that have been shown now with a lot of enough circumstantial evidence to get my attention, really screw up your microbiome. And we now know that the microbiome, which is the bacteria that live in your gut, there are more of them than there are of human cells in the body, and they make a huge difference to our health. They influence everything that has been studied, from schizophrenia to depression to weight gain. So you need a healthy gut. And the artificial sweeteners in sodas only damage it and upset it. And the sugar in the non-artificially sweetened ones is metabolic poison. So we're consuming all of these chemicals and all of the sugar or artificial sweeteners, and there is absolutely no upside to soda whatsoever, ever. Kind of the same thing with donuts, kind of the same thing with French fries.
Oh, man, okay. Well, those are 3 that if, you were going to make a big switch quickly, those are 3 that would be pretty easy to get out of. What are 3 things maybe you would put into your pantry that some people might not think should be in there? What should we put in our grocery cart this week?
I am a big fan of supplemental fiber. I use a brand called Sun Fiber, which you can buy Sun Fiber, by itself, but Sun Fiber is also an ingredient that a lot of fiber manufacturers use. So if you look at a company like Regular Girl that makes fiber, look on the back, their fiber ingredient is actually sun fiber. So I like adding that to beverages because, number one, it doesn't give you any of the side effects that a lot of fiber supplements do, like bloating and gas. 0. Has no taste, mixes in anything. You can disguise it in your kids' food. And the reason I believe that's so important, probably 3 reasons. One is nobody gets enough fiber in this country. I mean,
really?
It's very, unless you're making a considered effort, the recommendations, and I rarely go with recommendations. I think they're always too low, and the recommended daily allowances for vitamins are a joke. But even the recommended daily allowance for fiber is between 25 and 38 grams a day, and Americans get about 10 grams a day, if they're lucky. Huh. So I think we can all real benefit from an extra scoop of sun fiber or whatever fiber you like. As a regular thing. And that's I use that all the time. I mentioned before that I include a lot of fats that maybe some people would not necessarily think are great, but I know are great. Avocado oil, coconut oil. I mentioned Malaysian palm oil, one of my favorites. And a quick word why I say Malaysian palm oil as opposed to others is there is some farming of palm that can be destructive to the environment. Malaysia doesn't do that. Malaysia really protects the animals in the forest. So I like it when it comes from Malaysia. So,
is that something that you can buy in a regular store? I don't know that I've ever noticed Malaysian palm oil. Is it?
You see palm oil. You rarely see it with a excuse me, with the excuse me. You rarely see it with the name Malaysian over it. But in fact, a lot of our palm oil does come from Malaysia. And if I can find out the origin, I try to stay with the stuff that I know it comes from Malaysia. Palm oil is like the olive oil of the rest of the world. I mean, Africa and Asia, that is the go-to oil. It is a very large percentage of oil consumption in the country. So we really want it to be good stuff. And it's in a lot of products that you're already eating. Other ones that I keep around besides palm oil and olive oil, and I'm a big fan of olive oil. Avocado oil is good. I never use canola oil. I use grass-fed butter all the time, and I use ghee, Ghee, which is a kind of clarified butter. So those are my go-to fats.
Yeah, it's interesting. A lot of things you mentioned, I know I've read about in reading about the keto lifestyle. A lot of those things have really become, I think, a little bit more known about in the last couple of years. What do you do? What's your advice to people when it comes to cravings? Because as soon as you start pulling some of these things out of your diet, you start just obsessing on them. And this is where I love your psychology degree coming into this. But what are some tricks to get over food cravings?
Well, that is the $1 million question, isn't it? Because that's the thing, that if you didn't have cravings, we wouldn't really be having a problem with diet. Everybody would just change to eating healthy food.
Yeah, you might be unemployed as well.
The thing about cravings is that by the time you have them, it's kind of too late. So it's not that you can't do anything about them, because there are things, and I'll tell you my personal tricks for cravings. But the best tip for cravings is to not have them in the first place. So if we look really at when cravings strike, they strike at night. They strike while you're watching television, and you can go through 6 bowls of cereal while you're watching reruns of Friends, right? When you switch to a more fat-oriented diet, there is less need for influx of sugar. To me, the best way it is way easier to say no to foods if you're not dying to eat them. Mm-hmm. Then you don't have to use as much willpower, which is a finite resort and a limited resort. I don't care how willful you are, you can only hang from the ledge by your fingernails for so long before you let go. So my answer to that is, let's see if we can prevent those cravings from happening in the first place. And often when they happen at night, people say, what should I eat? And the answer is, what should you have eaten in the morning of that day? It's more likely that if you can front load your diet with fat and protein, you're a little bit less likely to be craving those sweets. And why do we crave those sweets? Because, and this is another big theme to think about, we run our bodies on some combination of sugar and fat. Those are our energy sources. The body doesn't like to burn protein unless it's starving. That's like burning the sails on a sailboat for wood. I mean, for warmth. You prefer for the engines to be working because you need those sails. But the body will break down protein and use it for energy. But it's it's unusual and not desirable. So basically, we're dealing with fat and sugar. Most of us have what I call a sugar-burning metabolism, which means that we are relying on sugar, which means we constantly need a store of it coming in. That's where the eat every 2 hours thing came from, because we just assumed everybody was a sugar burner. What the keto community has taught us is that the goal of these keto diets is to train your body to burn fat. Sitting on the treadmill and burning off the power bar you just ate isn't doing anything for your fat stores. Now, as it turns out, fat as a fuel source, first of all, it's endless. You can store about 1,800 calories of carbohydrates in the body in a form called glycogen, but you can store about, 84 gazillion calories of fat. Just look, it's all around you. So not being able to access that is like having a lot of money in the bank and you don't have the ATM code. Keto diet, kind of the keto, a more fat-oriented diet, opens up those stores, because now sugar's not coming down the pipe every 2 minutes. And when your body learns how to, this fuel that I haven't touched in a long time because I don't have the ATM code, oh, this is great fuel. I could use this. Now it doesn't need the constant influx of sugar. Mm-hmm. So with what we call fat burning metabolisms, where the body knows exactly what to do with fat as an energy source because it's around all the time and it's coming in and you're eating it. People who do that find that there isn't as much. If they don't eat for like an intermittent fast, they don't eat all morning, they're not starving. Their body's got plenty of fat to burn on. So when you're depending on constant influx of sugar, it kind of supports cravings.
Right.
I'm not saying they go away. I'm saying that they're more modifiable. And now you may be able to use some willpower, and some of the tips like I could give you, they're going to be a little bit more effective because your body actually has an alternative fuel source now.
So your tips are front load the day and have the fat. And for some people, depending on your age and kind of the area you grew up in, that's a little not maybe what you think you should be doing, but go ahead and embrace some of those fats that maybe before you used to think were not good for you.
Well, think about the people who think that the low-fat diet and eating cereal and orange juice and a banana and toast is a good breakfast. The people who've been taught that, if that was working for them, they wouldn't be listening to this podcast.
That is true. That is true.
People who say that's not what I was taught. Ask yourself, is what you were taught working for you? And if it is, God bless you. Do not change a thing. If it's working for you and you've got energy, and that's really the thing you need to moderate. What's your energy like? Because people who have no energy, it's almost always their health isn't great. I mean, right. It's hard to be really healthy and you have no energy. It just doesn't. They don't go together. So monitor your energy, and if it's good, and if you're bright-eyed and bushy-tailed and you're greeting the day with energy and enthusiasm and your sex life is good, your digestion is good, all the markers of, hormones and systems working well, they're all check. Stay with what you're doing. The fact is, most people listening to podcasts like this and reading books like mine have found that what they were taught doesn't work. So they're looking for an alternative. So don't say, well, that's not what I was taught. You're right. It's not what you were taught. And that's why I'm a nutrition mythbuster, to tell you that a lot of what you were taught is BS.
So number one, be honest about how you actually feel based on how you're eating.
You got to start with that. You know what I mean? It's a Shakespeare, know thyself. You've got to start with an honest appraisal of what's working and what's not working.